All right. Well, welcome to session 5 of the Oregon Citizen Assembly pilot on COVID recovery, everybody. It's really nice to have you here. Thanks as always for your service to your fellow citizens of Oregon and for your time on these Thursday evenings. We're now on our 5th out of what is going to be 7 officially of these. Originally was 6, and at your behest, we've added another one. And in fact, at the end of the day today, you will help make the decision on what you're going to do for sessions 6 and 7. But for today, let me start the slideshow. I guess, Jenna, I need to become a co-host in order to do that. If you could do that for me, that would be great. All right, well, that's fine. I don't really need it. Oh, there we go. I got it. Okay, perfect. All right. Okay, oh, I've got to get out of Zoom here. There we go. So, yeah, welcome. This is what happened last time. We went over the core principles again, and you prioritized them. You made some decisions about sort of which ones were most important to you. We also heard from our second witness to the assembly, one of your witnesses from the education category, and you selected 2 more witnesses, one in each of the focus areas, housing and education. Now, as I think we told you by email, but I could be wrong. Maybe we didn't actually. It hadn't been decided by that point. But we had a heck of a time finding witnesses for this one. We actually went to your second choices as well. And it being summer and it only being a week's notice, perhaps, we had a lot of trouble finding any of those folks for this week. And then realized, well, there may be a silver lining to this. There's other stuff that we can definitely do in the meantime. And it's not like those selections of witnesses have been lost in any way. You'll still hear from the folks that you selected, at least if you choose to continue on with both of those focus areas. So as I mentioned, you'll make decisions today about what you'll do for session 6 and 7. And one of those decisions will be, well, let me go to the next slide, actually. At the end of the day, you'll make a decision on continuing to work on both focus areas or spending those last 2, sessions 6 and 7, on just one or the other. So this was an idea that came to us, and we thought, oh my gosh, perfect. Let's have you talk about that and make a decision on what you think. So we'll be doing that at the end, but I kind of got ahead of myself. First, we're going to be getting a legislative update from Senator Roblin, who's on the call here. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. We'll also review the survey results that Wendy mentioned. You'll revise your prioritized principles then. That's what you'll be spending most of the day on. You'll be selecting into which kind of principle, which of the top 8 principles you want to work on. And then you'll be working on those principles, just making them sort of more just improved and clarified. And just as a reminder, as always, here's your guiding question. The first part of it is, what do you see as relationships between the pandemic and inequalities in social and economic structures, et cetera, that you selected way back on session 2, and also the 2 focus areas that you selected way back then too. Here's the roadmap that we started with. And here's the roadmap sort of where we've ended up. We've added a day, and you know what, I've just realized that maybe you can't see my whole screen. I'm not sure whether you can or not. There we go. So the principles discussion, we've extended that quite a bit because there's quite a bit of meat there to work on. You'll continue to work on it today, and actually just potentially a tiny bit into the next session, but not sure about that. Information, you're still collecting stuff, and there'll still be stuff collected via these experts in the next session. And then you'll start just a little bit today working on these recommendations. And I'll talk more about principles versus recommendations in a moment. But first, I want to welcome Senator Arnie Roblin. And let me stop sharing my screen there. There we go. His district covers the Oregon coast from Tillamook Bay to Coos Bay. And given that the Oregon legislature is going into another special session starting on Monday, we looked for a legislator that might be willing to give a very brief update on what might be happening in the session, in case that information would be useful to you in your work in the Assembly. Senator Roblin was one of the co-chairs of the Joint Special Committee on Coronavirus Response, which you may remember was the committee that heard all of that testimony that you got a chance to look at. And we sort of categorized, and then there were all those documents that you could go, hundreds of pages of stuff that you could go back and look at if you wanted to, that was sent to the Joint Committee back in March. So we'll only have time for a couple of questions after he says a few words. So if you think of a question, raise your hand while he's speaking. And I think with that, Senator Roblin, 5 minutes, and then we'll take a couple questions.
Thank you, and keep me on time because I can get going. But two things. One, we finished yesterday an emergency board meeting, so that people understand how it works. We set aside some money to the e-board, which is a select group of legislators, House and Senate members, and then we can distribute resources, money, to the agencies or give them the ability to spend that money. And since we got a lot of money from the federal government, $1.86 billion, we have had to have a number of e-board meetings to give the different agencies their ability to spend that money. So the money was given to the governor, but the governor has to get permission from the legislature to authorize to spend it. And that's what the e-board does. We did the last of those monies, or most of them, yesterday, giving different agencies the ability to spend that. One of the issues yesterday failed, so we'll have to work on that later. It had to do with the state buying PPE, but it's an interesting part of how the legislature works. On Monday, we go into a special session called by the governor to deal with the budget. We had a special session a few weeks ago that had to do with policy bills. This special session will be, I think, mostly devoted to the budget. When the coronavirus hit, we lost $2 billion in revenue. We have a requirement to have a balanced budget, so we will be going into special session. We have been spending the last 2 months in different subcommittees of the Ways and Means process to figure out how to surgically reduce money. Like you have a list of principles, the 3 co-chairs, there's 2 Senate co-chairs, 1 House co-chair, came up with a set of principles that they wanted us to look at after talking to economists and others. One of the principles was that we didn't want to reduce K-12 and college funding. That was $9 billion, K-12. That's the largest part of the single largest part of the budget. There are some other budgets that are very large, but that has to do with federal money. But from the actual general fund, $9 billion goes to K-12 education. And then they also said hold harmless housing and other issues around housing, because those two seem to be really important for the economy and for Oregon in general. There is a new tax that we put in place that is just being collected called the CAT tax, corporate activities tax. That money is also going to education, so they will actually get a bump up in education money. A lot of that came because of the Student Success Act that I was also the chair of when we had that meeting. 18 months of going around and recognizing that schools are a different place today than they were a few years ago when I was a principal. So we'll go in Monday. If we stay just to the principle of doing only the budget, the hope is that we will have 7 or 8 budget bills that will take care of that. We have to go and take money out of a special fund to hold education harmless. We put together some reserves a number of years ago, and the Education Stability Fund has about $1 billion. We're looking at taking $400 million out of that to balance that budget. Other than that, we went through, I'm one of the co-chairs of the subcommittee on transportation economic development. We had to cut some money. We went through and looked line item by line item where we could cut. And one of the principles that the budget committee had was that try to do things that don't include firing people. We want to keep as many people employed as we can. So if there are people that haven't been hired, don't rehire them. Do other kinds of things to reduce money and not hurt programs. So we were able, I think, in the large part to do that. You will see the newest budget coming out of the tri-chairs here shortly before we get into the meeting on Monday. But the goal is to get in and out fairly quickly, because It's also difficult, as you've seen around the country, when the legislature comes into session, there is a chance that we can get sick. And in many places that has happened. And there are a lot of legislators like myself that have underlying conditions. And so we work really hard at trying to stay away from each other while we're in that building. And so that's kind of what's going to happen in the next few days is that session. There are a number of bills out there. There have been committees working on things like police reforms, liability reforms, safe, how do we take care of employees and make sure that they get taken care of if they get sick in the line of work. All of those other kinds of things may or may not happen. It depends on the leadership, along with the governor, to decide what we're going to work on. But this one was really called to balance the budget, which we have to do. So with that, I'll let you ask any questions you might have. And as I was looking through your goals and aspirations, I know education is one of them. It's been my largest part of my career. I was a high school principal in Coos Bay long before I got into this business. And I have been on the governor's task force on reopening schools. So I've been spending a lot of time on that, and also on the governor's advisory group, economic advisory group, for the last 2 months. So staying involved in a lot of the different issues that you are talking about here. And I am impressed with what you chopped off to take on. Those are big issues. And I would say that the hardest thing for me to say is that we do need to do some changing with respect to equity in education and in the regular budget process. It is hard to do that in times when you are downsizing, which is what we're doing, cutting that money. And the future for our budget looks like a $4 billion loss the following biennium and another $3 billion loss the biennium after that. For the next 4 years, our economic outlook is pretty dim in the state.
All right, let's go to a first question from Ken.
Senator, thank you so much for coming tonight. And my question's about education, because you seem like the perfect person. We listened to the state Department of Education and got a really excellent presentation on the way they're using very data-driven metrics to evaluate when and if it's safe to open schools. And I was very impressed by it. And then the next day I heard on the news that a group of legislators from the state legislature had complained and said they don't want to follow that. They want to be able to make a local political decision and didn't really like the idea of metrics. Is that going anywhere?
I would expect not. My guess is that it's a group of people who don't quite understand what happens when kids get the virus and take it home and the spread. Having my district has Newport in it, and we had an outbreak there at a fish processing plant. It overwhelmed the community very, very quickly. We've had those happening in rural areas more and more. And I think the metrics that they came up with, I was part of the conversations along with it, that I think they are good metrics. They correspond with successful openings around the world.
Thank you. That's great news.
All right, let's go to Jeff, and that's going to be our last question here, unfortunately.
Thank you, Senator. I was curious about the monies that are going to the school, since we're having the kids are going to be staying at home. Is there going to be any training for those parents that kind of taking on some of the responsibilities of the teacher? Just kind of wondering, is there any directive that you guys are given how these districts are going to spend the money?
The answer is that most of the money that school districts get goes to paying for salaries and other kinds of stuff. Those things are still there. We had a really robust conversation about this on the advisory committee for the education reopening, and everybody agrees with what you just said. There has to be more training for parents. If they're going, many of the parents when we closed schools at the end of last year, and it was really not comprehensive education at that time, it was just figuring out what we could do. Some of those parents don't know how to even open the Chromebook they got, let alone how to do the connecting and help their kids do those kinds of things. So I think there is a real understanding that there needs to be more outreach to parents to give them the tools they need to be helpful and successful in helping their children. I hope that there will be more of that. Actually, the teachers need a whole lot of training in how to do best teaching online, because that's not been their forte. their forte is developing relationships in a classroom, and we know that it's those kinds of relationships that help kids become the learners they need to be. But I'm hopeful that we will have some money put together to do that, and that there will be some training in multiple languages so that parents can make the best use of their time with their kids. So if we don't figure out ways to do that, the disparity between those that have and those that have not is going to only get greater during this time, and we've got to figure out how to do that.
All right,
Thank
super. Thanks so much, Senator, for your time. That's all we have time for at the moment. So appreciate you stopping by and giving an update.
Absolutely, thank you. And if there's any questions anybody has, I always available. So take care. Thanks.
All right, super. So I'm going to quickly go back to my slides here, if I may. There we go. And just to go over really fast, you've seen this last time, but just to put it up again, where we're headed, and these two pieces that we're talking about: principles, which are sort of these overarching broad ideas, and then particular recommendations about particular policies that you think are important. And those will form the two parts of the report. And later on, one of the very last things you'll do is sort of lend your support or not to certain principles or certain recommendations. But before we get there, we need to sort of refine the principles, and eventually you'll gather more recommendations and refine those too. We're not to that point yet. We're just still on the principles. But let me just sort of point out one thing here, which is that the sort of difference. I'm not sure that I've done this clear enough in the past, but just so the idea here, the difference between principles and policy recommendations. Principles are just broad ideas, sort of a checklist to check other policies against. Examples: this must be fair to everyone. Well, hopefully it would be more of a principle than that explains more of what that means. Or it must prioritize such and such and such. No matter what the policy is, it must do this. Policy recommendations are the things that should actually be done, the actual solutions. Decrease the budget for whatever, increase services around whatever. Just as sort of a little bit of a background there. And with that, let me switch over to a different page here. So I wanted to show you, first of all, how the principles shook out. And don't worry, this isn't the last time you'll see this at all. But your moderators can come back to this page if you want to look at where the other ones shook out. What we're going to ask you to do is actually take out that page, the page of 60 different principles, and mark these ones. So the ones, and as I said, this isn't your last opportunity to do this, are 22, 21, and this is in order, and you can see sort of the number of votes there in brackets. 22, 21, 43, 12, 27, 29, 54, and 55. And then there's more listed here in order of how they were, how the votes came in, that you may want to add to these ones. So these were the top 8, but they're not necessarily in final form, perhaps not at all in final form. They were just kind of ideas that you brainstormed a long time ago. You've learned a lot since then, and there's a lot of other ideas on that list of 60 that might work well in here, that maybe got, fewer votes, but are a good kind of, another piece to one of these that you might want to incorporate. So that's why we've encouraged you to look back at that list. I'm going to move on to the second page here, which is to look at the survey results. And again, you will get a chance to look at these more later, but I'm just going to read through them really fast. And just a reminder that that the survey is this sort of unique opportunity to talk across the back fence, as it were, to 600 people, as it turned out, about 600 of your fellow Oregonians. It's not scientific, but it's about people's lived experience, and which is the kind of stuff that you really wanted to hear from them. So that's the kind of questions that made it in here. And there's a lot more information to the survey than this that's been posted on your panelist resources page. So if you feel comfortable looking at that, if you have extra time today, or probably not during the session here because there is going to be a lot going on, but between sessions, between now and next session, take a peek at that and see what you can find from the sort of letters that have been written from your fellow Oregonians to you about what they think is important. I misspoke. I'm actually not going to read through these because of time, but you will have time here to read through them yourselves actually in the next section, where you'll be talking about them in small groups. And then after you've talked about them a little bit and answered a couple of sort of discussion questions, you'll have a choice of which one of these 8 principles, and they're just pasted on here on the right-hand side for reference. All the survey results are on the left, principles are on the right. You'll have a chance to pick from among those top 8 principles which is your first choice and second choice to work on tonight, and then we'll form groups based on your interests in what you want to work on. As best we can, we might have to insert a little bit of randomness if there are too many people that all want to sign up for the same ones. So with that, let's move into kitchen table groups for this first small group session.